At one point in time, there was a man from the nation of France who dominated the world before him and laid waste to all those that dared challenge him. For his abilities, cunning, guile, and calculating strategic calls, he has been lauded by historians over the years, but his short fuse and even shorter stature are arguably even more notorious. At this point, it's kind of obvious who I'm talking about, right? Yeah, the one, the only, Alain Prost. Wait, hang on. Who do you think I was talking about? Prost is inarguably France's greatest racing driver. Apart from maybe the two Sebastians. Had fate fallen his way, he could very well have been a 10-time Formula 1 world champion. And for good reason. His speed was excellent, but the way he managed the races back in his heyday was unmatched. Truly one of the all-time greats in motor racing. Everyone talks about who will be the next Michael Schumacher, the next Ayrton Senna. When it comes to the next Alain Prost, people reckon they found him. And while I will largely agree with that, the driver in question has a couple of problems of their own. Being born in Paris to an Algerian family that consisted largely of doctors and physicists, you wouldn't think that this would be the home place of the next French motor racing hero. But of course, it's gotta start somewhere. Where did it start for little Isack? With, obviously, the movie Cars. Oh, I see. So we're starting to foster in a new wave of F1 drivers based on Pixar films? His father was also an amateur-level endurance racer and would watch Formula 1 in his spare time. And so, naturally, Isack started watching too. The interest grew until eventually they bought him a go-kart at the age of 7, and away we go. Hadjar would compete in the French karting scene for a number of years, quite competitively too, in what is a damn competitive series with heaps of freaking good drivers. But somehow he could just never quite capture a championship win. The closest he would get was when he came second in the French Cadet Championship to Hadjar David, who himself was a damn good pedaler. Hadjar would never exceed these heights over the next couple of years, struggling to so much as summon a top 10 in the European karting scene, and so eventually decided, fuck it, let's have a go at racing cars. He tried his hand in the Ginetta Junior Series in the winter of 2018, but this didn't do much good for him either. No points. No matter, they're British. Surely that was the problem. He would head back home for 2019 to compete in the French Formula 4 series. He had won the prestigious Winfield Racing School trophy before the season started, and thus would receive tutoring and financial support ahead of said season. Although again, this wouldn't end up being all sunshine and rainbows. In the end, he would finish 7th in the overall standings, which was topped by his old foe, Hadjar David. And in a 3-driver affair in the Junior Championship, he would wind up finishing 2nd to Victor Bernier. It probably wasn't helped by the fact that thanks to his limited proportions, he was unable to fully press down on the pedals, at least when he first started to drive these things. Now, did that affect him throughout the whole championship? I don't know. He'd probably like to argue that it did, and that 2020 would herald even better results. And it would. But he kicked off the year with a couple of rounds in the F4 UAE series. The results were kind of average, but the primary focus that year was another stint in the French F4 series. Hadjar would take 3 wins that season, all at Paul Ricard. His pace was strong throughout the entire year, but it was toward the end of the year where it appeared to pay off on the results sheet. He was a constant presence on that podium, but unfortunately, for him anyway, he couldn't capture the title, instead finishing over 100 points away from the championship winner, Ayumu Iwasa. It was this championship win, in fact, that caught the ever-present eye of Dr. Helmut Marko, who ushered Iwasa into the Red Bull Junior team. Given that this is a pretty decent, albeit brutal, pathway to Formula 1, Hadjar thought, yeah, you know what, I'd like some of that. Of course, catching Marko's eye usually requires nothing more than a good Wikipedia page or naive bravado. Having moved up to Formula Regional for 2021, this is where things get a bit more serious for a racing driver's career. The cars are becoming more powerful, and more eyes from the F1 paddock will start peering towards you. The second round of the championship in Barcelona was one of the rounds on the Formula 1 support bill. In that second race, Hadjar started in 5th position, right behind old F4 foe, Gabriele Mini. But he had no interest in remaining there for very long. Using all of the track and then some, he forced his way past Mini, eventually finishing that race on the podium. Now, was this the hallmarks of a championship drive? Were these the hallmarks of the driver that would go on to become the 2021 Formula Regional European champion? No. In fact, he finished that year in 5th place, behind teammates Zane Maloney and, once again, Hadrian David. Superman had Kryptonite, Vijay Mallya had the Diet, and Isack Hadjar had Hadrian David. Everyone has a weakness, I guess. Despite finishing the year strongly with a win at Monza and being crowned the rookie champion, Hadjar hit a slump in the middle of the year that somewhat derailed his campaign. But as far as bad news goes, that's where it ended. Because at that Barcelona race, watching from the grandstands was Red Bull driver Sergio Perez. And he saw that move that Hadjar pulled on Mini. He was rather taken aback and beguiled by this act of lawn mowing and quickly spread the gospel to Marco. Marco also watched back on results from the Asian F3 series earlier that year and bore witness to some stirring drives that saw him rack up 5 podiums from 9 races with Evans GP. After meeting in Monaco, the pen was put to paper. For 2022, Isack Hadjar would be a Red Bull Junior, and now things would get really interesting. FIA Formula 3 is where you go once you start to get real serious about your Formula 1 ambitions. And here, Hadjar will be teamed up with Hitech. He had already become acquainted with them earlier that year in the Asian F3 Winter Series, winning a couple of races with them to boot. But FIA F3 is kind of big league territory, and with that Red Bull backing, he was expected to perform. It wouldn't take him long. He won the first race in Bahrain, and throughout the first half of the year, he just gathered a consistent load of points. He found himself in the hunt for the championship alongside Roman Stanek, Zane Maloney, Ollie the Bear Behrman, and Victor Martin. Everyone was very impressed with what they saw from Isack, but there were some issues starting to seep through. In that last round at Monza, it was apparent that Hadjar was just not coping with the pressure. The heightened sense of panic over the radio embodied the ethos of a deer caught in the headlights, and the simple truth was that he butchered his own campaign when he looked a sure bet at one point for the title, and instead of winning the championship, he ended up finishing in 4th. He was clearly one of the pace setters, and people were already starting to compare him to the great Alain Prost. And I mean, to be fair, he even sounds like him too. Break his nose and have him drive into a hotel foyer, and you've basically got a reincarnation here. But this lack of cope from him was a little concerning. I know the pressure was high, but it only gets worse the higher you ascend up the ladder. So what do we do to combat that issue? Or more specifically, what did Marco do? Well, he put him up another level, of course, and sent him straight to Formula 2. And now's where things start to get shit. He went into the season with great expectations, but that season, he'd round out the year 14th in the standings. He recorded no pole positions, no race wins, and only 1 podium. There were 6 Red Bull Juniors on that grid that year, including teammate Jack Crawford, and Hadjar finished lowest of them all. It was a complete disaster, and relations with Hitech had broken down. And yet, while 5 Red Bull Juniors finished ahead of him, 4 of them would be dropped come season's end. Hadjar, though, would remain in the Red Bull program, and many, including very much me, asked the question, why? Where is the hype in this guy? Cause I just don't see it. Yes, he may have been fast, but as an overall package, I had no idea what the hell Marco saw in Isack Hadjar. That was until 2024 had to turn up and piss in the cornflakes. For this season, he switched over to Campos, a team very much all over the place when it comes to form, but this year at least, they were the goods, and so was the born-again Prost. While not exactly being remarkably consistent, he was clearly the pace setter in the early part of the season, taking 2 wins in Melbourne and Imola. He was always up the front, he was always setting the pace, and after taking 2 more wins at Silverstone and Spa, Hadjar looked a guaranteed bet for the Formula 2 title, but there were some things that were going to cause him some headaches. Firstly, this is Formula 2. Apart from parity being somewhat questionable, it's also a championship with a reputation for rancid reliability, and Hadjar was no stranger to that this year. This undeniably hindered his championship charge, and that is not good when, on the other side of the grid, Gabriel Bortoletto had started to hit his stride and had largely escaped the wrath of Mechachromisms. But the reality is that Mechachrome cannot be solely blamed for everything here. There was something else rising to the surface here.
No, man, you can't say P2. You can't say that. No, man, can you believe what just happened or not? It's a joke, man. Come on, we got to this race.
Now, I understand those frustrations, especially with how he lost that race in particular. And hey, he reminds me of me during the morning commute.
Joke, man. Come on, we got to this race.
However, his performances in Monza and Baku were just flat out not good enough, scoring no points in either of them and ceding the championship lead to Borto in the second to last round, despite the lead seeming unassailable at one point. In the final round at Abu Dhabi, he struggled to match Borto's pace the entire weekend, and then in the final race, the lack of an anti-stall finished off his hopes and dreams, and his championship charge was finished. But it wasn't all doom and gloom though. After all, his main goal in his career was to reach Formula 1. He already had some FP1 outings last year and throughout 2024 as well. This was also around the time where Red Bull were in the midst of reshuffling their lineup. The irony was that the man who was being cast out was Sergio Perez, the man who spotted Hadjar in Formula Regional and pressed Marco to sign him to their Red Bull Junior team. Now here he was, in the right place at the right time, and eventually he would be named as Liam Lawson's successor at Alfa Minardi Tauri Rosso whatever the fuck for the 2025 Formula 1 season, thus completing his dream. That should be all that matters here. But what that also meant was that he rounded off his junior career without a single junior racing championship to his name. And that's something that very few drivers in F1 nowadays have ever had happen to them. Of course, stats are not the be-all and end-all of motor racing. I get that. I'm not that much of an F1 YouTuber. How he actually performed on the track in the flesh warrants him getting the shot, but he very well could have been a Formula 3 and Formula 2 champion. And the reasons why he did not is what concerns me. You could argue that in both those cases of lost championships, mistakes on his end were ultimately what let him down. We could yap on about Mechachrome all we want, and trust me, I want to, but Hadjar would sometimes drop the ball with little to no mitigation once the pressure started to ramp up. It may have been his formative years, and surely he'll iron things out, but he's about to go into the ultimate pressure cooker of them all, the Red Bull Formula 1 family. He's gonna go up against a very competent Yuki Tsunoda as a teammate, even if he's a little bit suspect under pressure himself, and depending upon what happens at the main Red Bull team, this could very well be an audition year for that second Red Bull seat for Hadjar. Morsels of speed are good, but unless he can prove to keep a cool head under pressure and not let things get to him, it could not only hinder his chances of a promotion, but potentially put him in the firing line of Arvid Lindblad, who is virtually guaranteed at least one of those seats next year, and toss him out of Formula 1 altogether. Do you doubt me on that? You saw how fast they threw out Nick de Vries, and don't try and play the hindsight card. No one seriously thought that that would happen. But it did. De Vries had belief in his ability, and no doubt Hadjar does too, as he should if you're going to be at this level. But he also has to accept that there are shortcomings that he has to correct. Just like with any other racing driver, I guess. There's always stuff you can improve on, and with Hadjar, that is a crucial area, because Red Bull are historically unsympathetic to drivers who don't meet their expectations, and if Yuki leaves him behind, or if Hadjar throws points away, that could ultimately spell doom for him. I like his passion, and passion behind the wheel is good, but he has to control it. His short fuse and even shorter stature may be a bit notorious at this stage, but his abilities and calculating strategic calls could have him lauded in the years to come. And if he could do that, if he can harness his emotions and use that to good effect, then what we've got here is what many in the French press are already calling the Little Prost. Or perhaps for something more of his flavor, the next Lightning McQueen. Ka-chow.